Hello everybody, Blue Dooley, and we're back on the CXT. I have it sitting on a couple of old Clodbuster tires and some of the jig stuff to get the chassis up high enough to clear the J-Concepts tires that this truck is running. I pretty much finished up the main chassis rails, so now it's on to mounting front and rear suspension. So now that we're not covered in dust, you can actually see the paint job way better if you have not seen the truck before on the channel. A member of one of the truck forums I belong to painted this a long time ago with automotive quality paint. He airbrushed it. It does have some cracks and stuff in it because the truck actually, when I was building it originally, the workbench tipped over and broke it. So there is some damage to the body, not on this side. This is the good side. But yeah, some old Clodbuster tires and two of the spacers. The chassis, the bottom of the chassis is actually about almost 5 inches from tabletop to bottom of chassis. And I didn't, well, the tires, I just printed out some hexes. They're not slotted, so I can't actually use them. They're just there for mock-up. And actually with these rims, the width fitment, I'm actually really happy with the way that fits. The body and the axle aren't exactly centered to each other, but yeah, that winded stance out a little bit. The chassis and the shocks are going to be a lot wider apart, so the truck's going to be a lot more stable than it was initially. Alright, so the shock's going to mount with a bolt straight out of the chassis, and I'll put a couple of nuts between the top of the shock and the chassis rails. That'll space it out properly. And then the track bar mount is actually almost right in line with the shock. So I'll have a nice long track bar, because it'll come from outside a rail to outside a rail. So that'll give me a real long track bar, and then the drag link will also be nice and long. I'm going to mount the steering servo parallel with the chassis. That'll get me plenty of drag link to keep the angles real shallow. That'll really eliminate the bump steer. As stiff as those shocks are, it's not going to have a lot of suspension flex. Since the tires are mounted on this axle, we'll kind of talk front suspension looking at the rear axle, just because it'll be a little easier. So both front and rear axles have pretty big suspension link mounts. Now I've switched these around so this longer part's on the bottom of the front axle. And I have the chassis tubing I'm actually using is actually just wide enough to cover this completely. I'll just slice the side out. So I'm going to put a piece of tubing over both of these holes for the front suspension. And I'll actually run this tubing. Actually, that almost works pretty good. So the tubing will be centered between the two bolt holes. Run out a little ways. And then I have these 5mm hemi joints, hemispherical joints, whatever you want to call them, rod end, which will go in the end of the tubing. And these are magnetic, so I think I'm just going to weld the rod end to the end of the tubing. I'll drill, I also got a nut and a screw head. I might put a little slice in here and then just run a weld across the screw head too. That'll give me really nice secure mount So the front's going to be radius arm, which is why I'm using these really huge hemispherical joints and tubing that's actually probably the same diameter as the axle tubing itself. So that'll be the front suspension. It's not going to be super long, as again, the truck's not going to have a ton of flex. I just wanted a nice big thick radius arm. I think that'll look really neat on the truck. Give it a little different look than a 4-link or a 3-link with the track bar. Suspension's kind of however you want to do it. So that is the front suspension. I think we're actually going to use the, I have the metal rod ends that I'm going to use, but I think I'm going to keep the HPI length of the suspension as these are, the crawler links are a little longer than the plastic links, but then it'll just be standard 4-link triangulated bottom of the hole to the chassis and then axle out to the chassis. So I'll actually double triangulate it so the top links will be in and the bottom links will be out, if that makes sense. So yeah, these will come probably not this narrow, but just enough to have a little bit of an angle, and then the other ones will be opposite. That gives me a double triangulated rear suspension, so I won't need to worry about the axle shifting side to side. So here's what I'm talking about. My holes didn't quite line up 100%, but this is where the axle bolts to, and this will be radius arm. And I only drilled the bottom holes because that allows me to change the angle of which the what the radius arm will be at. So that'll kind of depend on ride height, things like that. If I want the radius arm to come straight off the axle or have a little bit of an up angle to it, that's really going to be what I think looks good, as opposed to accuracy. I just need both sides to be the same, so that's kind of why I also like the little bit of adjustment. In case my weld isn't quite flush, I got a little wiggle room to make sure the axle is where it needs to be. So now I need to cut off my tubing and weld the rod end to it, and then measure a whole bunch of times to make sure both of them are the same length, so these bolt, at least metal parts are the same length. I can actually wallow the holes out a little bit, and that'll also give me a little bit of alignment and wiggle room in case my cuts and stuff aren't perfect. So that's what they're going to look like. I need to clean this other one up. Hit it on the grinder, smoothed it out a little bit. I actually cooled them off in water just so I didn't mess up these spherical joints too bad. I dunked them in the water to cool them off, and then after I ground this, I cooled it off again, and then I hit it with WD-40 to get the water out of that spherical joint. I'm going to do that on this axle, and then we need to make sure my tabs are both ready to go, and then it's just a matter of welding these to those tabs. Front body mount's really easy. It's just a bolt through the angle iron front cross member. So now what I need to do before I actually get too much further on the suspension is I need to mark on the chassis axle center line. That's kind of important, because once I get axle center line marked on the chassis, then I can figure out how far back the shock mounts. So I have the axle mostly in the right spot. The magnets just aren't quite the right size. Well, maybe if we go that way. Alright, so as I mentioned, I haven't drilled the top hole for these yet. They can only go up so high before they rub into the shock anyways. And that angle's actually not too bad. I mean, a little bit of an up angle won't hurt anything. So I'll measure out how far I need to go from heim joint up to chassis, and then we need to cut out the flat steel that's going to be the outside mount, and then we can get that welded up. Like I said, the front end will be mostly where it needs to be. The track bar will make the last little adjustments on that. So that's kind of how much space there is between the axle and the chassis itself. Got her sitting pretty good. Little higher than I was expecting, but there's 2 motors to go underneath the hood, the transmission full of brass gears, a fairly stout bumper, so I think by the time I get the rest of the stuff on the front end, it'll sit a little better. I am going to have to trim my angle iron back just a little bit, because the shocks are kind of rubbing up against it. And that's kind of scooting the axle over this way a little bit. As you can see, this side's vertical, this side's leaning out a little bit, but really get you in here. Plenty of clearance between the tire and the radius arm, which is just what we were wanting. So, yeah, plenty of room. A lot more steering angle, which the truck desperately needed. So that all is coming together good. The radius arm mounts, again, are kind of hanging down low, but again, that fuel tank's going to come almost down to here too. As soon as the steel closes off a little more, we'll mount that bottom cab mount kind of thing, see how it's sitting. So let it cool off, and we'll come back with the fuel tanks and stuff on it. So there's with the air tank on this side, the air tanks, 2 of them. We'll come around here to the other side. Yeah, with the fuel tank from this side, you gotta be really low to see them radius arm mounts, and that's why I wasn't too concerned about how below the chassis they were, because that fuel tank and those steps hang down so low. Of course, plenty of tire clearance between the tank and the tires. So now that the front's pretty well done, I am going to have to squeeze those mounts together a little bit, kind of align stuff a little better. Just some little tedious stuff that's not really worth filming. So next we need to get the rear axle figured out where it goes, and hopefully by the end of this video it'll be completely sitting on its own suspension. So we got the chassis upside down, and I've got the tires spaced up almost correctly off the tabletop. Need like just a little bit more up, but I think right now they'll be okay. So as I've mentioned, the rear is going to be triangulated, double triangulated 4-link. Let's flip the lower links out of the way here. So the upper links will be almost outside to outside frame. And then the inner links I'm going to bring in as far as I can. Or at least to the inside of the frame. So they're not going to have a ton of triangulation on the lower one, but the upper links will be really triangulated. So looking here, I think what I'll do is just weld a piece of angle iron across, and then just put some tabs for these upper links. Like I said, probably as far apart as I can get them. And then the lower links will mount further back, or actually a little further forward. And yeah, I'll probably have the mount come on the inside of the frame rail, and that'll allow me to mount these inside the frame rail, and that'll give me pretty good triangulation on both sets. So let me cut this piece here, and then we'll get at least the one set of links mounted and go from there. It's actually getting late enough. I need to clean up and shower before the wife goes to bed, and I don't like being out here welding and grinding and beating and banging when she's trying to get to sleep on a Saturday. But I did get the transmission and the motor out. The front, except for the track bar, is done. The rear, I need to mount the lower links, and I think after a little consideration I'm going to remount the shocks up on the chassis. I got a screw sticking out of just straight out the side of the chassis right now. I think what I'm going to do is actually run a piece of angle iron out and then run the screws forward and backwards so the shock can pivot this way a little smoother. That's how I did it on the other chassis, and I think it'll work better on this chassis too. But again, plenty of room between, because this isn't even up close to the grill. The grill's up even with the front of the chassis here. So plenty of room for the 3-speed, my goofy dual motor box, both of them easy runs, plenty of space. I am going to have to trim out the original body mounts are in about the center of the hood. I'm going to have to cut those out. But chassis, it's getting there. So what I did on the rear end was just cut a piece of angle that would fit in there, mounted 2 tabs to it, and then kind of slid it so the axle's where it needs to be. And then now I just need to mount up the lower links, weld everything up, do a lot more grinding, and then the motor and transmission, I'm gonna just put a tab here, and the screw that bolts the 2 halves of dual motor box will go through the mount here. I don't know if I need to put another motor or a transmission mount on the back. Probably will have to wait until I get both motors in. The other thing is this motor or this transmission is narrower than the previous transmission, so the cutout here is plenty big enough for the transmission to fit in there. So I might actually do the rear transmission mount off of that. But it sits on here real nice. Plenty of room to mount electronics. Plenty of room for the airflow to come in through the grill and cool everything off. The bed mount, I'm still not 100% sure how I'm going to mount the bed, because I need to space it up quite a bit off of this chassis to mount it. And then I still got plenty of material to tie in to my gooseneck plate. So, unfortunately, we're going to have to stop there because, like I said, I need to clean up, close up all the garage and stuff, make sure my welding bottle's off. Always triple check that. And if you're not sure, check it again. Otherwise, you run out of welding gas and the next time you want to weld, you're out. As always, hope everyone had a good weekend. The only support I need, like, comment, subscribe. We'll catch you in the next one.